Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. If folks are able to turn on their cameras, we would love to see you. But we also understand that sometimes we're in situations where we can't turn on our cameras, and that's fine if you want to leave yours off. But I just want to say hello. My name is Andy Engel, and I lead virtual public programs here at Reimagine. I want to welcome you to the final session of our series, Surviving a Sibling, a look at grief that's often overlooked. For those who may not know, Reimagine is a nonprofit organization catalyzing a uniquely powerful community, people of different backgrounds, different races, different ages, different sexual orientations, different gender identities, people of faith, people of no faith, all coming together to support each other, to face adversity, to face loss, to face mortality, and to transform life's biggest challenges into action and growth. We make Reimagine resources available through our website. We have support groups. We have events like this one. They are mostly free or sliding scale. And that's a courtesy of all of you who make donations to Reimagine. So thank you for those who have done that. Your gift is going to be really helpful in helping us move forward this year. So thank you. I'm going to paste some links later in the chat where you can learn more about opportunities to do that. I was just telling our speakers today how wonderful this experience has been, this three-part series, Surviving a Sibling. I want to particularly welcome those of you who are gathered here today who are the forgotten mourners, the surviving siblings. We welcome those of you who are here because you want to show up for surviving siblings and you want to learn what to say, how to act. So we welcome you. Last week, Eileen Kilty, who you see here on the slide deck, led us in a beautiful movement workshop to help us regulate our systems. And the week before, Nina Rodriguez, who is here today, led a discussion with a group of surviving siblings. Nina is a host of a wonderful podcast that you should check out. It's called Grief and Light, and she has been my primary thought partner in this series. The conversation 2 weeks ago with Nina touched on a number of topics. What I found most compelling was the concept of the shadowed milestone. So a younger sibling can feel fear and anxiety when she approaches the age of her older sibling, and then finally exceeds her sister's lifespan. So a sibling becomes frozen in time. There are many life cycle events that we avoid, that we anticipate, or that we lean into when our siblings are no longer alive. I'm going to paste links in the chat later so you can access the recordings to both Eileen's workshop and to Nina's panel. And that's it for this series. Today, I did want to give you a heads up that there will be an opportunity to go into peer-led, prompt-driven breakout rooms. So please stay for that. Before we begin, just quickly, for those who wish, you can click on the CC icon at the bottom of your screen to get a transcript of what's being said. And if you want to see the recording of the full transcript, click on that CC icon and select the View Full Transcript option. I hope you'll use the chat today. If you have questions technically, feel free to send me a private message. I'll try to help you out. We are recording parts of this program. We won't be sharing out the breakout session portion. And so you'll get a follow-up email with information about our speakers and the recording. Okay, now I can see all of you. Oh, I'm so glad so many cameras are on. I am excited to bring writers David Martinez and Nico Slate shortly. Both are accomplished writers, both teach writing, and both are surviving siblings. David is the brother of Mike. Nico is the brother of Peter. I'll share some links so you can learn more about David and Nico and Nina and their memoirs. So with the time that we have together, David and Nico will be in conversation for about 35 to 40 minutes. Our theme tonight is action, the small, sweet steps that we hope you can consider taking towards learning, towards growth, towards transformation. We will invite you, as I said, into the peer-led breakout rooms, and you'll be in there for about 20 minutes. And then we'll invite you back for some announcements at the end. Welcome, Nina Rodriguez, sister of Joseph. Your panel was awesome 2 weeks ago. We had 4 amazing women talking about sibling loss. And today we have 2 lovely gentlemen in conversation about sibling loss. I think it's an interesting thing to share with all of you is that I'd say around 80% of Reimagine's audience are women based on the surveys that we conduct. So Nina, I just want to ask you, what is going on here in terms of gender in the so-called grief space that you and I occupy?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me back. It's been an absolute honor to work with you. I'm also loving seeing everybody's faces. I see some familiar faces from the first and second session, so welcome back. And if you're new here, hello, my name is Nina Rodriguez. I am Joseph's sister. He was my only sibling. He passed in September 11, 2019, the day after he turned 32. He didn't even get to celebrate his 32nd birthday a full 24 hours before he passed. And so that catapulted me into the world of grief and all things sibling loss, and the birth of the Grief and Light podcast as a much needed conversation for siblings in this grief space, which has now been expanded to just grief as a whole as well. I want to welcome also, on my end, Nico and David, who are going to share their stories. And to answer Andy's questions, well, I think there are some expectations that women and female presenting people are more encouraged to be open about our emotions and feelings. And it's just that association with female energy. But I have been seeing more conversations taking place to be more inclusive of all genders, and men in particular, who are honestly opening up more about grief. The more we normalize these conversations for ourselves and each other, the more we can connect with each other. And it just takes a little bit of coaxing, perhaps, for certain people. Before we get into the depths of this conversation and into the memoirs, which are fascinating, I do want to take a moment to anchor our energy and leave whatever's been happening outside of the space. Take a moment to relax your shoulders, settle in, take a deep breath, and thank yourself for being here. This is not easy sometimes to talk about. It can be emotional. All of your reactions are welcome here, whether they are emotional, physical, discomfort, it's all welcome here. So I invite you to close your eyes or lower your gaze, whatever's comfortable. Take a moment to pause and breathe. And together we honor the journey that has brought us here, the love we carry, the grief we bear, the memories that shape us, and the resilience that sustains us. I invite you to bring your siblings into your heart in whatever way feels right for you, perhaps by saying their name or typing it in the chat, remembering a moment you shared, or simply holding their presence close. And if it serves you, allow them to be here with us in the space of remembrance and connection. And so it is. Come back whenever you're ready. And we will begin. The memoirs are some of the most personal writing that we could do. All writing is personal in nature, but memoirs are deeply rooted in our personal stories. So I would like to begin the conversation, open up the conversation. So if you could provide some context for everybody, Nico and David, and briefly describe your memoirs for those who perhaps haven't had a chance to read them, to get to know a bit of your story. And whoever would like to jump in, go ahead.
We're both being very polite and respectful.
Go for it, Nico.
Well, okay, I'm happy to go first. First, I just want to say thank you, Nina, for inviting us into this space with so much care and grace. Thank you, Andy, for inviting me into this conversation. And it's a real honor and pleasure to speak with David. If you haven't already, I strongly encourage all those with us today to read David's book. It's deeply moving. And I want to thank you all for coming into this space together. I thought I would just start with a very short anecdote from my childhood that I share fairly early on in my book. It took place when I was 7, and my family, my mother, my brother, and I were living in Los Angeles, and the Domino's pizza delivery person was mugged outside our house. And I was a very angsty, imaginative 7-year-old, and I became very afraid. And my mom tried to comfort me as best she could, but I was still really struggling to sleep. And my brother, Peter, came into the room and told me that the iron bars that we had on our windows could only be cut by a very special kind of saw that had a diamond blade. I think he made this all up. I don't think this is true. But he told me that it could only be cut with a diamond blade, and that these were extremely rare. And even if someone had such a blade, that it would produce this terrible squeal and would take hours to cut the window. And by that time, he and my mom could come in to help me. And that's what actually helped me sleep. And that moment is very revealing of who my brother was as a brother. He was deeply caring, deeply imaginative, and deeply empathetic. He was 7.5 years older than me, so he's a 14-year-old kid, but he was able to put himself in my shoes and be there for me in a way that helped me sleep and that has stayed with me my whole life. Now, my brother and I were both raised by a single mother. We had different fathers, both of whom left at various junctures. Now, my brother's father was from Nigeria, which meant that in the American racial system, most people saw him as Black. And that, both being Black, being biracial, and growing up in a family with a white mother and a white brother had a huge impact on his life. And one of the key moments in my book took place when my brother was 21 and he was dancing in a club in Santa Monica, California with a young white woman, and a group of white men attacked him. And my brother ended up losing his right eye. And that then later contributed to the car accident that took his life when he was 30 years old. So the narrative arc of the book goes from my brother's early life, how his father met my mom, what it was like for them as an interracial couple in the 1960s, through my brother's childhood, my childhood, and then ultimately my brother's death and the grief that both my mom and I faced and continue to face. And one of the key reasons that I wrote that book was to help me get in touch with my own grief. It wasn't an easy process. I don't think it's easy for anyone, but for me, it was hard just to open the door at all. I think at first when my brother passed away, my entire focus was on caring for my mother. She happened to be staying with me. Actually, I had just taken my first real job. I took a job as a high school English teacher and had moved into a new apartment. And my mom had come up to the San Francisco Bay Area to help me move in and was just staying a couple days in my apartment when we got the phone call that my brother had passed away. And I remember vividly, I was in the shower and I just heard my mom start to scream. And I thought that someone had broken into the apartment. I only just now realized this is kind of a connection back to the Domino's story. But I don't know why. I just assumed someone had broken the apartment, and I kind of leap out of the shower, grab a towel as if that's going to do any good, and sort of storm out there and see my mom just lying on my futon, weeping and pointing at the phone. And so I pick up the phone, and it's my grandmother telling me that the police had come to her house to tell her what had happened. And of course, at first, well, I shouldn't say of course, I don't know if this is true for everyone. For me, at first, I was just in complete shock and quite a bit of denial. And I remember calling the police officer who had come to the house and left the phone number and just asking a bunch of questions, trying to find some proof, some evidence that this wasn't true, that there was some mistake. This couldn't have been my brother. Um, when um, when I realized that I couldn't find any such proof, my attention turned fully to my mom and caring for her. And it really stayed there for about a decade. She, struggled to eat, had to leave her job immediately, moved in with me, and was in such profound and complete collapse that all of my attention went to caring for her. And it took a long time before I felt like I had the space to start to grieve. And then I didn't know how to do it. It was very difficult for me to get in touch with my sense of loss. Of course, I thought about my brother all the time, but it's different to think about someone and to grieve them. And I wrote the book in part to open up a door so that I could start the actual process of grieving. And it was in that way, I won't say healing because that's too definitive a word, but it was helpful. It's helpful to be here today with all of you. So with that, I'm gonna hand things over to David.
Thank you so much. Thanks. And your book is amazing, by the way. And I love that you started with the Domino's story, because I sincerely appreciated that. Having slept in places where there's bars on the windows. Well, having lived, not just, yeah, lived in places with bars on the window. So yeah, absolutely. So I'm from everywhere. My mother is from Brazil and my dad is from Wyoming. And we lived in Puerto Rico when I was a teenager and lived in Florida for a while. I lived in Brazil, I lived in São Paulo and in Fortaleza for a while. Also here in Arizona and for like about a year in downtown Salt Lake. I never actually left downtown pretty much the whole time I was there. So I started writing this book. So my little brother, Mike, is 3 years younger than me. And he was one of those kids that would like follow me around everywhere all the time. And when you're little, you think that's kind of annoying, but as I got older, I realized like I love having this guy around. So even when we were, preteen teenagers up until he died when he was 33. He died in prison in Tucson. He died of septic shock. And I think one of the most tragic things about it is that it was completely and totally it didn't have to happen. He had caught COVID, I think. It was during the time of COVID, but nobody was, I mean, it was prison. People they didn't care. And it turned into pneumonia. And the pneumonia turned into sepsis, which turned into septic shock, and that's how he died. And we came up together from the time that we were very young. We both got into we both had heavy drug addictions by the time we were teenagers. And so we came up through a lot of trauma together. And we were bonded. We used to tell each other all the time, it's like, yeah, man, we're more than brothers. And so I used to see him every day. Used to hang out with him every day. So it was one of those things as I was writing the book, because I had started writing it before. He had been in prison for a while. He'd gotten out and went back again. He'd gotten out, was living on the street, and then went back again. And so, but I was well, he called me twice a day. For any of us that have had loved ones, very often siblings in prison, they get 2 calls a day, 15 minutes, and he would call me both those times and talk to me for those 15 minutes. And so as I was writing the book, I was talking with him about memories. and I thought that I'd written it. I thought that it was done. And on February 28th, because I believe it was not a leap year in 2021. February 28th, I sent out my my manuscript to agents thinking that the book was done. And I got an email from him that night saying that that he hurt, that his liver hurt. And he always ended his emails with like, love you, brother. And, or, thanks for everything. You're my best friend. And yeah, I had been telling him to go to the doctor. He wouldn't go because it was during the time of COVID. He would have been basically put in solitary, quarantine. He would have been by himself, and that's a horrible experience, and he didn't want that. So anyway, he had emailed me that, and the next day he passed out while getting food and in line, and they took him to the hospital, and that was the last email that I got from him. He died the next day, so March 1st. Which is like in a few days. It used to be dates never meant anything to me. And now it's like they do, and I don't like that. But so yeah, that very same day I withdrew all the submissions that I'd sent out, and I started to rewrite the book. I'm a writer, and that's what I do, and I'm compelled to do it. Anybody who's a writer will tell you that it's not an easy thing, and you have to be some kind of well, special, let's say, to sit down and write a book. And so yeah, I started from there. It was one of the best things that I did for my grief personally, is sit down and write the book. And I started the day after he died. And I have a picture of it. I should put it in the chat. I have a picture of after some of the final edits of the book, where like my eyes are just like red and puffy. And I had cried so much writing it that I got styes. I had never had styes before. And if you don't know what styes are, think of like eye pimples on the inside of your eye. By the way, when you cry, don't wipe your eyes with your hands. It's not good for you. So anyway, it was a process going through. Even after I sold the book, it took about 2 years before it came out, and edited for those 2 years, and yeah, it was intense. Mike was the kind of guy that the moment he stepped foot in a room, you would smile. You may not have even seen him step foot in the room, and just his presence would like flood. Hilarious guy. I don't think that I will ever meet anybody as funny as him. Yeah, just a joy to have constantly been around. After he died, I was the only one in my family for a long time who spoke to him for many years. So I was his beneficiary, and I'm the one that went and picked up his stuff at prison. And it was actually the prison that called me first, but it was at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I wasn't able to pick up. And so they went down the list, and they finally they called my dad, and he drove out there, but never called me. My little brother is the one who actually called me to make sure. And yeah, and I didn't have the money, gas money to get to Tucson, so I didn't go, and I didn't see him before he died. So it was all very intense. It was all very a whirlwind, and I think about, you know, I think about him every day, and um so I know it's a very rambling introduction. I think it's hard for me to do a straightforward introduction when I'm introducing both Mike and me, because um, the rambling is pure Mike, just with a lot more laughter.
Well, thank you both for that, for the introductions. And I can absolutely relate. How do we capture the vastness of the love that we shared, the fullness of their life in, like, you know, such a short amount of time? But it's very palpable that, for example, David, in your case, the two chances he had to communicate, you were his go-to person. And so that speaks volumes. And Nico, the fact that your brother sounded like a protector, almost like he doubled as a father figure, if you will, in your life, that also comes through very, very loudly. And I like that you said that the memoir opened up a door to deal with your grief. And I want to, you know, kind of dip into that, with also the second question, which builds on the initial discussion about gender and kind of how all that play, the dynamics more than anything. How does that play into your writing, into your ability to deal with grief, into any delays? I'm hearing, for example, Nico, that sounds like there was a bit of a delay there in dealing with your grief. So do you feel that there are different societal expectations placed on men versus women or non-binary individuals when it comes to expressing grief? And if so, how has this manifested in your experience and your writing? Whoever would like to go first, maybe Nico, go ahead.
Sure. Well, I again appreciate the question very much, Nina. And yes, for me, there was absolutely a long delay. And I have to say, it wasn't until this conversation that I considered the role of my identity as a man. I always explained that delay in relation to my identity as a sibling. And you know, as the title of this series makes clear, you know, sibling grief is often seen as somehow lesser than the grief that a parent feels. And in my case, certainly my mom responded to my brother's death with just a complete and total breakdown. And that meant that I both had to and also had an opportunity to, or an excuse to, delay my grief and to focus on caring for my mom. But Nina, your question helps me face the fact that I think certainly some of that delay also came from the fact that I, as a man, have always, you know, imbibed some of our culture's narratives about keeping emotion inside and being strong. And, you know, in my case, not on a conscious level, you know, I'm the kind of person, I believe very deeply in the power of emotion. And I was raised by my mom to cry whenever I wanted, and my brother too, for that matter, who was very much a father figure for me. I never felt shamed if I was distraught or crying or felt any sort of emotion. I was always allowed to express them. But I still think, you know, growing up in our culture, that I did bring some of that into my understanding of grief. And I think it did play a role. Now that I have this chance to think about it, I think it did play a role in me being so slow to face the enormity of loss that came with my brother's death. So thank you for the question, Nina.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Thank you, Nico. I also, while I had, yeah, I think this is the first time that I really considered this as well. And I needed a minute to sit and think about it, because it is it's very apparent in the book. And I suppose like how it affected me, how it affects me is, I like how you said that you felt you could cry around your brother. Um, because I felt for many years Mike was maybe the only person that I could cry around. And so it was beautiful for me to be able to write about it and even cry about it writing the book. But I didn't go to his funeral. I didn't, for a number of reasons, but one of the reasons was I was angry, and I was angry with my family. And I very distinctly said, I said it to my wife, I said it probably a number of times, they don't get to see me cry. And I think that was a big thing for me, because I part of it was that I was angry, and part of it was that I couldn't cry around them growing up, and so I didn't even want them to see me in this very vulnerable state. And so I didn't go. That, and it was a very religious affair, which Mike would not have liked, and I was really not into. And but yeah, and that does go back to being, it does go back to being a guy, to being a man, is that like that's one of the reasons that I wouldn't have even begun to feel comfortable crying around my father or my mother, that's just not, yeah, that wouldn't have been beneficial. Also, I was afraid that I was going to say things to him that would hurt them more than anything else, and I didn't want to do that. I just also couldn't be there to, I couldn't be that protector. I couldn't be there for them the way you're describing being there for your mother. And but that's part of it. As the oldest and as like the oldest son, that has always been my role growing up, is being they they always expected me to take care of the situations with Mike, and came to me with questions and came to me for advice and that kind of a thing. And I couldn't, and so I didn't. And yeah, that, and even growing up, I was the buffer between my dad's anger and Mike's issues. And that's another thing about being the older brother, is that's just what you do. um, you know, and again, I think yeah, a lot of that is the role of being the older brother, being the um the next level down man, I suppose, in the house. It's but yeah, part of it was, no, I couldn't show my emotions to, but yet I wrote a book that was, it's very emotional, and I, like I just said, like I cried um every day writing the book. um so yeah, it's an interesting thing, and I don't know that I know why I was able to do that with the book, um other than it was personal. It was like crying with Mike, which I did, which he did.
Hmm.
Yeah.
David, what you just said really resonated with me, and I wonder, um, are there ways in which writing the book and the book have helped you feel closer? Are there ways in which it's felt like it's been healing? And then the opposite, you mentioned your anger earlier. that's something I still really grapple with. I think it's one of the connections between our stories is that there's a lot of injustice in this story, in our brothers' lives. There's a lot of inequities, and I'm just curious to hear how you make space for, or what you do with that anger.
Oof. Yeah, it's something that I've been dealing with little by little. Part of the anger that I have, I think manifests in other writings that I do and in other parts of the book. You know, I am very explicit about like the difference. Now, Mike and I had the same parents, but you know, so my mother's Black and Indigenous, my dad is white, and so like we have a wide array of colors just in my immediate family. And Mike was very dark, and he appeared very, very indigenous. And so he was treated differently his entire life growing up. Um, and so part of my anger is geared toward that. I think part of my anger is geared toward being the one um, who wasn't being the one who was treated better. Let's say it like that. Being the one who
Yeah.
And as far as the anger with my family goes, I don't talk to them really anymore. I got to a point where I couldn't, and I understand that they're dealing with grief and they're dealing with anger. Honestly, the biggest tipping point for that was when they started saying very bad things about my wife, and so I was like, well, I'm not I'm not really gonna um, not gonna continue with this. But a lot of it does have to do with Mike. A lot of it absolutely does. Um, I was angry that they weren't around. I was angry that um, they didn't appreciate the son that they had. Um, but it manifests today in that I don't really speak to them. It manifests in as far as the racial disparity and I think in like what I do. Like it's the even part of the way that I teach my classes. I think I make sure to talk about it. I always make sure like I make sure we read down at the cross by James Baldwin. I make sure that we read so many things, and I very explicitly talk about it because especially because it's not talked about, and I think that's one of the things that I do. And I don't know, I think it is guided somewhat by anger. Not necessarily in a negative light, I don't think. But I think that it's important to me now to talk about what people don't like to talk about, but are afraid to, you know?
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me. I mean, one of the biggest things that I wish is that I could go back and talk more with my brother and have more conversations with him. And we were best friends, and we spent you know, our whole childhood together and talked about pretty much everything except for um, a lot of the most painful racial struggles that he had to face in his life, like the night that he lost his eye in that club in Santa Monica. And it's both baffled me and troubled me that I can't really figure out why I didn't ask him more about that. And I think some of it is that I was young. You know, I was 14 when he lost his eye. Some of it is that I'm white and I didn't really know how comfortably how to speak about these things at that time. And but some of it I think is also just the fundamental difficulty of fully putting yourself in someone else's shoes, even when they're as close as any other human being can be to you. And I think, you know, writing a book about my brother's life helped me feel closer to him, and it helped me feel his presence, but it also led me to recognize our differences and to wish that I had asked him more about his life and the struggles that he had. Even if the conversations were difficult, even if they were hard. And I appreciate, David, what you said about, opening those sorts of conversations with your students. That's something I've tried to do as well. I'm a historian now, and I focus on the civil rights movement and struggles against racism. And part of that is because of my brother's life, and because I want to help create spaces for my students to confront these issues and to think about them and to grapple with them. But I still wish my brother was here to do it with me.
Yeah.
I still often, I talk to him. I don't know that everyone does that, or it feels very natural to me, but I talk to him a lot, but it's
Yeah.
not the same, of course. My brother was a very unpredictable conversationalist. One of my favorite things about him is that he often surprised me with what he said, the advice he would have, the jokes he would make. And so I still really just miss him and wish that I could have those sorts of conversations with him. And
Yeah, I do the same thing. In fact, the other day, it's the weirdest thing. Like I said, it'll be 4 years, and like nobody ever texts me, and I felt my phone vibrate, and it's usually an email when it does. And my first thought was, oh, I wonder if that's Mike.
yeah,
And it's been 4 years.
yeah,
And I was like very excited for a second, and I thought, oh no, it is not. And then comes the thought, and it never will be again.
yeah.
And that always gets me. I'm I'm curious though, you said that what not just you said, your brother was older, like quite a few years older, right?
Yep, seven and a half.
And
Yep.
huh?
7.5.
Seven
Yep.
and a half, yeah, 7.5. And I'm curious, I'm the oldest sibling. I've never, experienced well, what it is to have an older sibling. And you said you were 14 when your brother lost his eye in that fight. Um, what is it for you to be, you know, the younger sibling, and then all of a sudden the son taking care of things?
I really appreciate that question. You mentioned earlier on a conversation that dates have suddenly become meaningful to you, and that you wish they weren't, at least in those ways. And that really struck a chord with me. I think it was Nina who talked earlier about the way in which we can, in some ways, outlive our other siblings. Or maybe it was Andy in his intro. That idea also resonated with me because I I still find it deeply strange that I am now significantly older than my brother ever was. I find that very peculiar and sometimes unsettling, and because he was always the big brother. He reveled in that role. He was so good at it. He was just a wonderful big brother, always, finding ways to challenge me. He could be tough, forcing me to climb over a chain link fence so we could sneak into the Greek theater, or, you know, um, uh, challenging me to, um, break up with my middle school girlfriend, even though I really didn't want to. So he pushed me, but he never pushed me too hard, and he was always there for me. And so now that I'm so much older than him, and that I've had all these life experiences he never had the chance to have, having kids, for example, is a huge one that I still often wish my brother could have had his own children. That that discrepancy is very difficult for me. Um, but if you don't mind, I'll flip the question around, because I'm curious what it means to lose a younger sibling. As a father now, I imagine all the time what my kids will be doing as they grow up and change. And I don't know with a younger sibling. I know it's different, but I wonder how that influences your own conception of time? You know, do you think about what your brother would be doing now and what he can't do?
I think for me, he was my little brother, so I was always taking care of him. Like I said, you know, like he was always following me around. And so the role that your older brother played, you know, sometimes I was there. Like I said, I was the buffer between my dad and him. And I was the one being like, yo, dude, you really should not do that thing. Or, you know, stealing cigarettes together from the grocery store, which was my idea. And like all these things. So it's one of those, like, I remember him as a little kid, and I remember him as the Mike he was not long before he died. The strange thing with me though is that it's probably because I've always been older than him. While there is a sense of like, you know, he could have done so much. One of the most intelligent people I've ever, one of those guys that he could do anything. But so smart that it kind of, he didn't know what to do with it. Um, and so I think that, but being older, it doesn't really hit me that I'm older than he'll ever be. But it's this strange thing as well. I just turned 40 and
Happy birthday.
oh yeah, no, thanks. Well, it was in June, but thanks. But it just seems like it was just the other day though. But it is but I still like feel like I'm, you know, 29 or something, you know what I mean? And so like I know that he'll never be older than 33 as far as, you know, whatever this existence is. Um but I don't think it probably hits me in the exact same way again, seeing just because um I know my little sister, she hit that mark that she's now older than he was when he died. Um and for her it was a big thing, and I think for me um it just that sense of loss that again he was my little brother, you know. um I think that was it, you know.
David, I'm going to chime in here because we got a really good question in the chat from Rachel. How do you think race slash ethnicity and religion impact grief? How do you think race and ethnicity and religion impact grief? Sorry. And either of you can chime in on that, just being a little bit mindful of the time because we're going to go in breakout room soon.
Okay. I deal a lot with religion in my book. We grew up in an extremely religious household, where I felt like I had to go on a mission to, well, so that my dad wouldn't get sick and die. Like honestly, that's how it felt. And so it permeated every aspect of our lives growing up. In fact, like I said, his funeral was a very religious thing. Mike wasn't really religious. He actually hated going to church, which was one of the reasons that he would fight all the time with my dad. And so um it's just one of those weird things where I think because of the rest of my family is religious, it's like they have their own type of grief, if that makes sense. Um, they're very involved with each other as far as their type of grief, and they're always like saying, "Oh, I know he's with, you know, I don't know. I think it's hard for me to express because of the that particular type of trauma involved, and I'm trying to be quick. Um, but as far as like racial, how it, you know, Brazilians do not take death very well. um, it is it can be a very dramatic thing. Like I've known people who will wear black for like a year after a loved one has died. And so that does that play on that side of my family? I think to an extent. I was recently able to spread some of his ashes in Brazil while I was down there, and that was a totally different experience than what would have gone on here as far as the religious aspect, especially because the religious aspect is very Anglo-centered. So it was just a very different kind of experience. I don't know if I answered anything, but that's more or less how it is. And let me switch over, Nico, to you.
Thank you, David. It's a really rich question. I'll just say that my mom's grief was heavily structured and channeled and helped by turning to a variety of different faith and cultural traditions. She's very much a child of the 60s, and so she has always been interested in many different faiths and never felt constrained to just one. So, Buddhism, Taoism, Hinduism, Judaism, Islam, various forms of Christianity. And she drew on all of them in one way or another to try to find different ways to approach her grief. And I kind of piggybacked a little bit in that journey. My own research is, as I mentioned before, on the civil rights movement, but also on India. I go to India quite often. And that has been meaningful to me to see how grief is approached in the different cultural and religious traditions of India. I guess my short answer to this really rich question is just that there are really interesting differences in how different cultural and ethnic traditions have approached grief, and that hopefully we feel able to learn from them. I think one of the things that David's comments about his about the role of religion in his family make me feel is just that sometimes you can feel constrained or trapped by a tradition, and that can make it even harder to process your own grief, right? If your family is telling you have to think one way about it, and that's not how you feel, I think that could be really hard. I feel blessed to be in a family with my mom where I always felt really open and free to find my own path and to try to learn from different cultural and religious approaches to grief.
Thank you. I think you said that very, very well, and I'm glad that you put it like that. That constraint on grief. That was good.
All spoke really well for these 45 minutes that the two of you are together. I am ambivalent. I want you two to keep going, but I did promise that we would have breakout rooms. So Nico and David, if you want to stick around, we'd love to have you. You can hang out with me in the main room. You can go into rooms, up to you. I'm just going to remove the spotlights here. Thanks to all of you for sticking around. So I'm going to prep you for these peer-led breakout rooms. Our goal is to have 3 people for each room. It's going to be approximately 15 to 20 minutes of time together. For those who opt in for the breakout rooms, you can stay with us in the main room if you like, but if you do go into the breakout rooms, we do ask that you have a minimum of audio participation. If you need to turn your camera off, that's fine. We just want you to talk, and that's why you're in the breakout room. And please be mindful of the time that you're taking in the breakout room. You're going to begin by briefly introducing yourselves, just your name and the name of your sibling if you are here for them. And then I'm asking all of you in the spirit of these wonderful writers to take a few minutes, maybe 4 minutes, to write a bit before you respond to the prompts that we're going to provide you. So the questions that we have, and I'm going to share these in the chat now by pasting them. Hold on. Let's see. The questions are, your grief has a wisdom of its own. It seeks to be expressed and witnessed. What does it want to say today? Another question we're offering, what is one thing you've been avoiding since your loss? And what is one small, sweet step you can take to gently approach it? A third option is think of an aspect of your grief that feels particularly heavy. What's one tiny act of self-compassion you can offer yourself around that? And finally, here's a fourth choice. Grief often shifts our priorities. Is there something new you've been curious about exploring or learning? What's one small way you can start? I'm going to repeat these by broadcasting them into the breakout rooms when you get into them. And remember, just choose one. These are 4 options. And in terms of the writing portion before you speak, don't overthink your writing. Don't judge it. This is not about perfect prose. It's not about polished poetry. I'm going to send you a message when we get near to the end of the breakout room. And also go alphabetically, I would suggest, in your group in terms of the sharing portion. 3 minutes each to start. You don't have to share exactly what you wrote. And the person who follows you in alphabetical order should alert you if you've gone over your 3 minutes. Remember, this is not about giving advice to others. It's about active listening and sharing your own experience. So I am now going to get us ready for the breakout rooms. Nina is going to give me a little assist here. Wish me luck as we get you into breakout rooms. So I'm setting it so that when I should pause the recording too, and I will do that. Welcome back, folks. I'm sorry that you weren't in the breakout rooms as long as I'd hoped you'd be. Zoom had its own plan to bring you back sooner. It is what it is. Our follow-up email, I'm planning to include those prompts in there so that folks can continue thinking about them. And I'd say now, if you connected with someone in breakouts and if you want to privately message, your contact information to follow up, if you want to continue the conversation, now's the time to do that. I want to ask all of you to complete a survey that we at Reimagine use to evaluate our programming. I would love for you to fill that out. And I'm going to paste that now in the chat. Here we go. Okay. Yes. We want to improve our programs. Things like breakout rooms, they should be longer. And I wanted to give you a heads up about other events that might be of interest. We have a vigil coming up next Wednesday on March 5th with Dr. Mary Frances O'Connor, who's the author of The Grieving Body. Some of you might have heard of The Grieving Brain, which is her previous book. This is The Grieving Body, How the Stress of Loss Can Be an Opportunity for Healing. Join us next Wednesday. If you go to our main website, letsreimagine.org, it's easy to find this event for next Wednesday, and you can sign up for that. I want to thank David and Nico again for joining us in this conversation. I want to thank Nina for helping steer these conversations and for your thought leadership. I could not have done this without you. I want to thank all of you who have joined us today to share stories about your siblings, to show up for loved ones who have experienced sibling loss. You will get a follow-up recording in your inboxes, along with information about the books by Nico and David. And I just want to say goodbye to everyone and have a wonderful evening. And we hope to see you at more Reimagine events. Take good care, everybody. Thank you, Nina. Thank you, David.
Thank you again so much. It was a pleasure to be here to talk with you all.
Thank you all.
Bye, everybody.
Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.